breaking news we are following this morning. Paul Pelosi, the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, hospitalized at this hour after being attacked with a hammer at the couple's home in San Francisco overnight. We do have our correspondents and analysts standing by. I want to begin with CNN Chief Congressional Correspondent Manu Raju. Manu, we are hearing from the Speaker's office about this incident. What more do we know about the attack?
Yeah, we are still learning more about this stunning attack at the Speaker's home in San Francisco. She was not there at the time, but her husband, Paul Pelosi, who's 82 years old, was at the time. And what we're learning from law enforcement sources is that an assailant came in, broke into the couple's home, and attacked Paul Pelosi with a hammer. Now, the Speaker's office put out a statement about what is happening, what they understand has happened here. They said in the statement, early this morning, an assailant broke into the Pelosi residence in San Francisco and violently assaulted Mr. Pelosi. The assailant is in custody, and the motivation for the attack is under investigation. Mr. Pelosi was taken to the hospital, where he is receiving excellent medical care and is expected to make a full recovery. The Speaker was not in San Francisco at the time. Now, we have learned that the Speaker was in D.C. at the time. She has been traveling across the country, raising money, appearing in campaign stops as we head into the critical midterm elections. Sometimes Paul Pelosi travels with her, oftentimes he does not. He has his own company, a financial leasing services company. He's 82 years old. He was in the news recently, was pleaded guilty to driving under the influence in August, but this comes also as threats of political violence and actual political violence have been playing out in all across the country as we head into these midterm elections. Fears over election workers' safety alike. We don't know the motivation of why this assailant broke into the Pelosi home, whether it was politically motivated or not. That is something that is still under investigation. We will report that when we learn more about it. But a staggering and scary moment at the Pelosi home as the Speaker's husband attacked by a hammer.
Yeah, absolutely. Manu, appreciate it. We'll continue to stay in touch with you as you have those developments. Also joining me now, CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller and CNN Law Enforcement Analyst, former D.C. Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone. Gentlemen, good to see you both this morning. So, John, if I start with you, if we look at what we do know, what we don't know, there's still a lot we don't know, but we know that there's a suspect in custody. This is what was referred to as a violently assaulted, according to that statement from the Speaker's office. And we've learned from law enforcement that a hammer was used. As you're putting all these pieces together, what are some of the first questions that you're asking?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing right now is you've got a 32-year-old man in custody. He comes into the home after 2 a.m. with a hammer and attacks the residents there, who happens to be Mr. Pelosi. So you start off your questions with, where was he taken into custody? Was he taken into custody in the home, at which point identification becomes much stronger, or based on a description outside the home in the area picked up by police? We don't know that yet. What statements did he make before or during this attack or after to police? Are they politically motivated statements, irrational statements, or was he there for something else? This is a day after we did extensive reporting on a threat assessment based on the political climate. We still don't know if this has anything to do with that, but the Speaker of the House is an enormously powerful official in the scope of the U.S. government, in the line of succession, and receives 24-hour protection from the Capitol Police. When she travels to places like New York, she receives additional protection from the NYPD, and the same in San Francisco. But family members, as we see here, can be vulnerable. So there's a lot to ask still.
And in terms of security, so I'm curious, your time there in Washington, D.C., we've talked a lot, of course, over the last couple of years about how the different law enforcement agencies within the district work together and how specifically that comes into play when it's about security for a lawmaker. As John's pointing out, the family is a little bit different. Would Paul Pelosi have had extra security, especially if he was home in California versus being in Washington, D.C. with the Speaker?
It's doubtful. U.S. Capitol Police, I think, is wholly unprepared, understaffed to take on the rise in substantiated threats against members of Congress. I think they're just simply understaffed.
So if they're simply understaffed and we look at the rise that we have seen in rhetoric, the rise in threats, and again, it is important to point out, as both Manu and John have said, we've been saying all morning, we don't know the motivation for this attack. We don't know if there is anything political behind it, but we can't ignore the warnings that we've seen from the NYPD here in New York City and really across the country about violent rhetoric. And Michael Fanone, of all people sitting here right now, unfortunately, you know better than anyone what that can translate to. When you look at what we do know, what is your major concern this morning?
I mean, my major concern is that the rhetoric that inspired the attack on the Capitol and the rhetoric that continues to inspire individuals to commit acts of violence for political reasons continues unchecked. And that, unfortunately, it seems as though our appetite for the inspiration of January 6th has waned. It hasn't been a major part of the conversation going into the midterms, and those responsible have yet to be held accountable. And that being said, I know that from the many members of Congress that I speak to, just like myself, have had to seek private contractors to provide security. Them because U.S. Capitol Police is unequipped, and me because I have no other alternative. But for those of us that continue to speak out against Donald Trump, those threats are an everyday reality.
John, when we look at how this is going to come together in terms of the Capitol Police, Whitney Wild was reporting earlier, they have opened a number of field offices. There is a field office in San Francisco. How quickly does, for example, the SFPD, Capitol Police in that field office, potentially the FBI, I don't know who else would be involved,
Totally.
How quickly are they working together?
So that's all happening right now. And I mean, this is the game changer here is there's a suspect in custody. That speeds this up enormously, which is, and we're doing the same thing right now. We're looking at his name, we're looking at his background, we're looking at his social media, because that's going to tell us potentially a little bit. But the FBI will come into this right away. Is this an act of terrorism? Who is this guy? What is his background? They have jurisdiction for assault on government officials or an assault on the family member of a government official if that is meant to intimidate a government official. The Capitol Police is primary for the protection of Nancy Pelosi, for threats against members of Congress. They'll be in there right now assessing, what does this attack mean? Who is this guy? Where is he from? Was it politically motivated?
Was the Pelosi home the intended target?
That's right.
We still don't know that for sure.
Right. Does that radiate out that threat to other members of Congress or to the Speaker? So their threat assessment machine is just beginning to churn now as they start to dig into the background of the offender, any statements he made, and so on. And then, of course, primary here, because as we say in the police business, they have the collar, is the San Francisco Police Department. This is their arrest. It could be superseded federally, but those state charges are what they're going to be able to hold this individual on. And they are probably the first people other than the victim, Mr. Pelosi, to have spoken to this individual. And what he said in those statements is going to be key.
Yeah, absolutely. John Miller, Michael Fanone, Manu Raju, appreciate it. Thank you all.
Switching gears back to this, violent crime hitting home for Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker says somebody broke into her house, brutally attacking her husband, Paul Pelosi. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Dana Perino.
Good morning to you. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning. Sweet man there, that doctor, huh?
Dr. John
Best of Percy, all right?
Yeah, Percy, get your act
My
together.
godson's got to get it together, all right?
Yes, he does.
Okay. Meanwhile, this attack taking place earlier today in San Francisco. Don't know the exact time, but Paul Pelosi's in the hospital. Speaker Pelosi was in Europe at the time. Her spokesman says that Mr. Pelosi expected to make a full recovery. Want to get to Leo Terrell, Fox News contributor. Leo, there's a lot we do not know, okay? The AP says he was severely beaten. We don't know how he got in. We don't know whether he was let in. We don't know if he knew Paul Pelosi, whether he's a complete stranger. But the write-up is that, quote, the motivation is still under investigation. Want to be a little careful on the story. We don't know yet. We don't know how he's going to pull out of it, Leo.
Well, first of all, I hope he has a full recovery, and I think that's the first thing I want to say. And secondly, I believe there's also a suspect in custody. But the bigger problem, Bill, is simply this. Crime does not discriminate. Rich or poor, black or white, city, suburbs, everywhere. It's everywhere. It's the number one issue in this country. And I think what Democrats need to do, this is a wake-up call, because you're talking about San Francisco. Bill, California, San Francisco, LA is the heart and soul of crime. Crime is permitted in this state and in a lot of blue cities. And I think at this particular time, a couple of weeks before midterm, it is a number one issue in California and throughout the country. People want to be safe.
Interestingly, I believe, Leo, that the suspect is in custody, right? And they say that they're looking into and investigating what the motive was. Some of these crimes don't get solved because you actually don't have the suspect, but in this case they do?
Yes, Dana, the reports are that he's in custody, but the key here is this: will he be released? Will he get back on the streets? I mean, let's look at Fox News has done a tremendous job of pointing out these repeated offenders. We need to know a lot about this person, but will he be released? Because we have that no cash bail rule in California. Career criminals are back on the streets. And again, Democratic voters, Democratic politicians, this is a wake-up call. Crime is everywhere, and it does not discriminate. So it's interesting to see what will happen to this suspect. Again, speedy recovery for Paul Pelosi. Will this change the Democratic position on crime? I don't think so, but I hope so.
That's a great point, Leo, about the bail and the progressive DA in San Francisco and the amount of headlines that the DA has generated. Dana and I were we were rattling off the number of public figures who have been victims of crime in the last year, right? I mean, you had the case in L.A. Karen Bass, the former congresswoman, wants to be mayor. She had guns stolen out of her house. Here in New York, Lee Zeldin in Long Island, there were gunshots fired outside of his home. His two daughters were home at the time. You know, the point being, it reaches in everywhere and does not discriminate.
Absolutely, it does not discriminate. And basically, these criminals have a license. They read the news. They know they're going to be released. So they're emboldened, Bill. They know that they're going to get back out. And these individuals, that subway incident, how many times was that individual released? This is the problem with Democratic soft on crime, George Soros-backed prosecutors. And it's going to get worse until there's a change. I hope the voters wake up and drive these Democratic soft on crime prosecutors out of duty.
Well, and another thing, Leo, is that just in the midterm debate, as both parties have gone back and forth on crime, Democrats focus a lot on handgun crime or gun crime. That is a problem. But even in this case in particular, he was violently beaten.
Absolutely. First of all, Dana, you know as well as I do, and Bill knows as well, that talking point on gun control is that's a talking point for Democrats every time there is victims of crime. They always talk about gun control. But this did not involve a gun. This involved someone breaking in and violently, without a gun, assaulting Paul Pelosi. It's an issue of crime. And what has to happen is that there cannot be no denial of this. Democrats are talking up crime right now in the last 2 weeks before the midterm. Too little, too late, Dana.
Well, we'll see what details emerge from this, Leo.
Well, and we don't know if there was a gun involved. We'll see if we find out.
It goes to the point that Bill Barr was making this week in the Wall Street Journal. Those who commit crimes, it's such a small percentage, but they do it over and over and over again and drive the numbers higher. If you change the policy, you got a shot at driving it back down. Leo, thank you for your time in L.A. More details on this when we get them in here. Thank you, Leo Terrell.
Hey, it's Will.